So at the time that we're having this conversation, you will have a new album called Ruiner, which will be released on the 13th of October through Profound Lore Records. We spoke about the way your songwriting and uh, your your approach to music has changed over the years. With Ruiner, it seems like there are a lot of ideas outside of the conventional approach to black metal has been integrated into your music. When you spoke about genres that are adjacent to black metal or overlap with black metal in terms of having a dark feeling, having the same kind of a rebellious approach, which genres would you say you were drawing from for this album?
So there's pretty much three genres that this record is based around. Obviously black metal, and mostly going back to my youth and really finding influence from the early Norwegian stuff, the old Emperor records, Gorgoroth records, Dark Throne, etc. Then I've have a deep love for crust punk, and so I've been trying to throw elements of that into my music for the last 10 or 15 years. I mean, we've done a Doom cover. We've had, plenty of songs that are just like absolute crust bangers. And so I tried to add a little bit of that in while not being overwhelming this time around. And then the third genre is post-punk. Huge fan of, stuff like Killing Joke, Joy Division, New Order, The Fall, The Smiths. So there's a lot of that emotion and kind of song texturing put in. So Ruiner is really kind of a large amalgamation of that. Mostly, me trying to rip off the first Gorgoroth record, but I just wanted to create a record that I would want to listen to when I was 15 or 16.
And in terms of composing the album, are you still mostly composing on your own and then bringing it to the band? Or is it more of a collaborative process this time around?
So it's collaborative, but it's collaborative in a way that is different from any of the collaborations we've done before, where like someone would bring some riffs to the table or a song to the table, and I would either say yay or nay. This time around, I wrote all 8 songs, and we went into the studio and recorded all 8 songs, and then we sent it to Alex because he lives kind of far outside of Philadelphia. He doesn't really wander into the city too much, and I don't really blame him. And he's got a whole bunch of recording stuff at his place. And so he took the 8 songs that we had, it was 2 tracks guitars, 1 track bass, drums, vocals, and he went in and he overdubbed many layers of solos or phantom sounds or just what he was inspired to do from the songs themselves. So even though there wasn't much face-to-face collaboration this time around, it really truly was a collaborative effort between him and myself. The record wouldn't sound the way that it does without what either of us brought to the table. So it was, I've worked with him now in a few different projects, as well as in Krieg for a long time. And this was the first time where we really, he's always somebody that I've really enjoyed working with. I think that he's musically just very adept and very creative and very underrated. And so this time was like the first time where like he really kind of just let loose with what I had, and that gives it just a feeling that it wouldn't have if it was just maybe he brings a riff or two to the table and that's it. Like just having him overlay on top of all that really just makes the record come alive.
When did you actually start? When did you start working on Ruiner?
So the first session was in September of last year. It was 3 songs. We were going to be doing a split with the Canadian hardcore band Withdraw, which we're still going to do. But once we finished those 3 songs and I sent it to Alex, we all kind of just had a feeling that this was different, that maybe this wasn't for a split. Maybe this was going to be the seeds to the next record. And so we decided to get back together in January of this year and do 5 more songs. And then that's what became the record. As far as the preparation for it, there was very little of it. The only song that was written or had like the general idea was Solitarily of Future Renounced. I had the main riff for that in my head for months, but I wrote the three songs in last September. I wrote it in a 2-hour session the night before I left to drive to Philadelphia. And then the other 5 songs, same thing. I spent 2 or 3 hours the night before, wrote everything, got, how the structure, how I wanted, certain aspects of it to sound, wrote all that down in a notebook, hopped in my car and drove up to Philadelphia. I'm not too sure about Alex's process. We spend more time talking about like trying to turn each other onto new bands, or helping each other complete our record collections, more so than any kind of like really deep recording stuff. We'll talk about like references, like, well, what do you want this to sound like? Here's what I can do. But I mean, he has grown over the last 10 years into, he used to just do recording on his computer in his bedroom, and now he's got a lot of equipment as far as I'm aware. And he's just really grown into being able to take something that was recorded in, basically a rehearsal room. The studio that we used for Ruiner in Philadelphia is a part of a warehouse where, it's a one-room studio that people either rent out for rehearsals or they do kind of, demo recording. We did the Split with Integrity there. And he's able to take that basis and then transform it into how Ruiner came out. I mean, he could ask me like, well, how do you want the drums to sound? I'd be like, I need it to have that Gorgoroth kind of click to it from, like their first, second album, the whole Grieg Holland kind of sound. And so he's just spent enough time, because I mean, he isolates himself. He doesn't really go out very often. He spends so much time thinking about music and how to record it and how to make things sound, that he's become probably the easiest quote unquote producer that I've worked with in a long time.
You mentioned that your bandmates provide an outsider perspective to your songs that you didn't have in the early years of Krieg. What was Alex's response to some of this material that you came in with? And I'm curious if he had any suggestions on songs that made their way to the album.
So we'd gotten together and recorded The Split with Crucifixion Bell about a year prior, and he had a lot of suggestions, and it really was more like kind of, it felt like I was knocking the rust off, because it had been so long since I've written anything. So it was kind of like helping me out there. Whereas this time around for Ruiner, it wasn't that he had like an outsider perspective. He was as excited about the songs as I was. And he knew that it would inspire him to do exactly what he needed to do for it. And that if he presented me with something that I didn't like, I could tell him and his feelings wouldn't be hurt and he would change it. But there was none of that with Ruiner. I mean, we were both basically on the same page for the album.
It sounds like he had free reign as a producer in terms of crafting the sound of the album.
Oh yeah. I mean, that is his domain now. And since, he has all this equipment at home, it's not like he's paying any kind of studio rent or any of that. So he has as much time with all of his projects, not just Krieg, but everything else he does. He has as much time as he needs to be able to play around with things and really construct the sound that he's looking for. And he's one of a very few amount of people that I can hand something of mine to, and I will trust whatever his judgment is as far as additions or how it should sound, just because he's really developed such a really keen ear for these things that it's just, I don't have to worry about him trying to put his stamp on things that might not be good. Like you hear horror stories about producers and engineers and whatnot that really just try to, enforce their own opinions and will on certain things, where bands are like, no, that's not what I, envisioned at all. But too bad, engineers already kind of plugged it in. He's, he's a lot easier to work with. He doesn't, he doesn't tell you, hey, this is how it has to be. It's a very open kind of communication.
And as a member of Krieg and part of the live lineup, he's got a good sense of what Krieg is and what it isn't, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, we've had over the years, we've had very deep philosophical discussions about just my history of the band, my intention with it, my relationship to black metal, his relationship to black metal, and just what we want out of the music that we do.
Was there anything he brought production-wise to the album that surprised you?
Yes and no. What surprised me, and it also didn't surprise me, was just his level of skill at being able to match sounds to the references that I provided, and his ability to hear things in what I'd written to layer over it. I mean, there's just some of his solos that are layered over things are just, it's the kind of thing that I would hear in my head and I would have absolutely no way of expressing how to do it. And so he surprises me constantly with his growth, but it's also not a surprise because I know that he's an exceptional musician and an exceptional creative person. And so we haven't even seen the beginning of his potential being realized.